All right, we are live. Mr. Dane, thank you for coming on, man. I love
Yeah.
talking to you, man. I feel like every time I get on and talk to you, it's just like I'm talking to a brother. It's just like right there. It's like we're already on the same page about what's going on all the time.
Yeah.
How you doing today, man? We were talking before we started recording, but now we're recording. So
Yeah,
yeah,
man, good. Yeah, life's good.
yeah.
Yep, yep.
Awesome. So why don't you just kind of give a little introduction about yourself and what you're doing now and what you're all about, and then we can sort of talk about how we met each other because you were one of the people that really helped red pill me to what the hell's going on, and it was like really like, whoa. So yeah, why don't you take the lead, man? This is all about you right now. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm from California, and grew up here. Uh, Man, where to start? I actually, so I grew up in the church, interestingly
Hmm.
enough, and I had like a kind of a moment where I was in it and kind of feeling like there was more,
Hmm.
and I was feeling like there was a point of kind of religion of where I was at, and
Hmm.
I was even reading things in like the book of Acts. And for
Hmm.
people who don't know, it's basically talks about like signs, wonders, miracles, things like that.
Hmm.
And I was wondering, I was like, wow, why don't we even see this stuff today? And I wasn't seeing people practice it, and I was more seeing, in my opinion, a lot of times like trying to fill the pews. So I really kind of turned away from that,
Hmm.
and just went on a journey of just trying to find out what the truth was, to the best of my ability.
Oh,
And
be
yeah,
careful.
yeah. It's a deep rabbit hole, it's
Yeah.
still on that journey for sure.
Hmm.
And yeah, constantly learning and growing. And
Hmm.
yeah, that kind of, I ended up having a dream where I saw myself in the mountains,
Hmm.
and I was working in a restaurant at the time.
Hmm.
I was a server there, and I just, when I had like really vivid dreams like that, there was something prophetic in the sense that like I would see it, happen. And so I knew there was something to this. I could feel it like in my spirit that there was something more, and I was supposed to go. I just didn't know what that looked like. And
Hmm.
so um, ended up, long story short, ended up in the mountains in Tennessee, and that's kind of where we met. Shortly after that, I was looking for work out there, and found a little Greek diner over in northern Carolina.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was about 30 minutes away from where I was staying at the time. And I remember when I walked in, it was so funny because at that point, yeah, I mean, you knew him. His name was Nick, and I was talking to one of the girls at the front. I was just like handing out resumes to a bunch of different places over there,
Hmm. Hmm.
in the area. And as I handed my resume out, she's like, "Oh, we'll give it a look over, but we actually only, we only hire females here." And so I was like, "Oh, okay." And
Of course.
yeah. And so
that's
I was
that's
like,
Nick for you.
yeah, yeah. So I just
Yeah.
figured like, all right, well, I'll just leave it with you anyways. And as I was walking out, I see this guy like unloading his truck,
Hmm.
and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing over here?" And so I went over and talked with him briefly, and he's like,
Hmm.
"Oh, well, were you looking for a job?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
a server and this and that." And so
Hmm.
he's like, "Oh, well, yeah." He basically just hired me on the spot
Hmm.
there, and
Hmm.
just said, "Yeah, like come in." I think it was like
Hmm.
2 days from then,
Hmm.
and you can start your first day. I'll start training you. And I didn't even know till later we actually had like a really cool relationship and friendship that developed from that, where he was like, uh, he felt like he had gone through like a lot of his own stuff, and in ways that he'd kind of been awakened to certain things.
Yeah.
And I feel like even with ways where he was saying like God was really speaking to him in
Hmm.
ways that he hadn't experienced before in like a
Hmm.
previous life, where he said it got really dark,
Hmm.
in situations and realms that he was in and
Hmm.
stuff. So
Hmm.
um he kind of just said, "Hey, like when I feel like when God shows me certain things, they also come to pass." And so we kind of bonded over a few of those things. And he was like, "It was really interesting when you
Hmm.
came in, you were in my dream." And so, I knew that like since you were in my dream, like you were
Yeah.
supposed to work here, and I knew that like as soon as I saw you, there was this like familiarity. So
Yeah.
That's kind of what started, working over there. And it was just this small diner. I remember it was like a lot
Yeah.
of people, barely any, people there and stuff. And so it was actually just awesome because like we
Oh,
got
it
to,
had the best food though, man. It had the
yeah,
best.
dude, we really did.
They closed down. I was so depressed when they closed down,
No,
man.
it's
Yeah.
still, yeah, the
Yeah.
best Greek food.
Oh,
So,
it's so
yeah,
good. I do
yeah.
want to back up just a little bit because I thought it was amazing. Like when you were telling me the story, um, you just on a whim, you had a dream and you're like, I have to go out to the mountains, right? And you just decided to go to Tennessee, or was that it? Or
Yeah, well, so originally I had gone to Washington
mm-hmm.
like months earlier, and so I didn't know what mountains they were or what that
Mm,
looked like.
mm,
And
mm,
so I knew a couple people in Washington, and so I initially was just like, oh, I'll just drive up the coast,
mm-hmm,
I'll spend some time up there, and
mm-hmm,
I was there for a little while, and
mm-hmm,
it was the same thing. So I was there, and I kind of just got caught back into this like similar lifestyle that I was in before,
mm,
and and I really had nothing, like
mm,
we were just like I was just like pitching a tent somewhere,
mm-hmm,
and just hoping for the best.
mm-hmm,
And I had a dream one night, and just this voice was like booming, and it just said Tennessee. And
mm.
so I woke up from that
Yeah.
dream, and I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know where, but I knew that that's where I was supposed to be. And so
Yeah.
just from I think I was only there for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, something like
Mm-hmm,
that, not very long.
mm-hmm,
And so I packed everything back up into the car, and
mm-hmm.
then just drove down like
And
34
you
hours
just
of
took off. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
then stayed
That's
in
yeah.
Franklin for a little bit, and then yeah, moved upwards and
Yeah.
was in the Appalachians.
Yeah, that was a long story for sure. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
thought it was so cool that just on a dream premonition, that's when you went out there. And
Yeah.
how many days was it before, like, that you were working in Parthenon, the name of the restaurant, before I met you? How many days was that?
It wasn't that long. It wasn't that long at all. No, I wasn't working there very long at all. I remember I used to bring like a box full of usually like books.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of different like topics and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend of mine that would just let me borrow his books, and I was
Mm-hmm.
always into like researching different
Mm-hmm.
things,
Mm-hmm.
kind of hand them out to me, and
Yeah.
so I just spend. If we didn't have customers, that was the cool thing about him is he'd just be like, "Oh, do whatever you want." And so if
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have people in there, I just sit there and open up one of the books and start going through it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that kind of leads into like where we crossed
Yeah.
paths. It
Yeah.
really wasn't that long of me working there. I think I had just finished my training. Maybe it was like a week after that or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, not
Mm-hmm.
long at all.
Yeah, because I used to DJ there. When I was I would DJ there and party there a lot. I had a really close relationship with Nick, the owner, and this was sort of when I was starting to wake up. I was learning about the law of attraction and everything. I had read Jerry and Esther Hicks' book, Asking It Is Given. I was having these really weird synchronicities, and I was starting to just sort of wake up to this. And I will never forget, man. You were sitting at the table, and you had that big box of books, and you were reading Jim Keith's Mind Control, World Control.
Uh,
And and I walked over, and nobody was in the restaurant, and I said, "That's quite a book to be reading in a public place." And you said to me, "Yeah, I sort of do it on purpose."
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that was when we started talking. I was like, okay, this guy definitely, like, I definitely got to talk to this guy. And that was sort of what like opened us on our journey. And then I met your mentor, and that really blew my mind. And so fast forward to after that, and then I had graduated college, and we sort of lost touch for a little bit of time. So this is where you can pick up your story after that. Yeah. So
Yeah,
go for it.
so
Yeah.
yeah, like you were saying before, that Greek spot, Parthenon, ended up closing down, and I was there for a little bit longer,
Hmm.
and in Tennessee, and
Yeah.
yeah, that friend who was like a mentor to me ended up
Hmm.
passing away, and so I was kind of in a place where I was like really on like a low. I'd walked through, yeah, just kind of seeing him pass,
Hmm.
and yeah, and still in that place of like, what do I do now? I actually thought I was going to be, there for like a long term
Hmm.
deal. And
Hmm.
so it kind of just put a hitch in my plans of like, what does this look like now?
Hmm.
And I actually had my mom was reaching out at the time, was like, hey, I'm going to be taking this trip over to Uganda
Hmm.
with I mean, she's now my wife,
Hmm.
and um, my wife had already been there for a year,
Mm-hmm.
before I had even gone over.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really didn't put any much thought into it. It was actually during the time when my friend was, in the hospital. And
Oh,
so I just kind of kept saying
okay.
like, no, it's not
Mm-hmm.
good timing, like, it's, thank you so much, but I'm just not interested. And then,
Mm-hmm.
it was shortly after that he passed. And after he passed, like I said, I was in that place of just wondering
Yeah.
where next,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean that I stay here? Does it, does it mean that I go somewhere else in the United States? Like, where am I supposed to be directed? And so I was really just kind of asking for some type of clarity from the spirit of
Mm-hmm.
what those next steps were.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up going to sleep that night, and then I had a dream, and I was with all these kids, in Africa, and I just like it was like one of those things again where I woke up and I was like, okay, I got to say yes to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I didn't know this until later too. So I ended up coming over on an initial trip, and I didn't know this until after. But my wife had, she was a teacher at the school, at
Mm-hmm.
one of the schools over there, and she was talking to a lot of the kids, and they were having dreams, and they were saying, I don't know if you remember. Do you remember like when I had like my hair, because my hair was longer at the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then I had a friend who was like a hairdresser. Was like, oh, I have like white hair dye. I was like, go for it. And then it
Yeah.
turned out to be like goldish, like just, yeah, like you just
Yeah.
bleach your
You had
hair,
like
and
super
like,
blonde hair.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it just did not turn out like, like I thought it would, but I was
I
kind
do
of like,
remember
oh, whatever,
that.
and just
Yeah.
sort of went with it.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
no, I mean, no one else really knew that outside of people, in Tennessee, but it was really interesting. All of these kids were having dreams and were saying, this man's coming, he's got long, white hair.
What?
And
That's so
um,
crazy, dude.
yeah, so like I really like I didn't know this until
Yeah.
afterwards, when I had come back from that first initial trip.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it made it even like crazier because as I'm there and I'm spending time with these kids, I was really in this place of even doubting myself. And I'd use all these different techniques, whether it was through healing or things like that, to really kind of help my friend through that time,
Mhm.
and nothing worked. And I just kind of watched him, get worse and worse. And I think, to be honest, like having such a kind of a bad taste in my mouth about like um, kind of the church, and kind of being in this place of seeing like a lot of the powerlessness in it,
Mm.
I really didn't see that there was any power in prayer. And
Mm.
so, you know, I yeah, I mean, I know this is like a little diversion and stuff, I guess, from the bigger story, but going into it, I was really having those doubts of, I mean, a lot, but really, like, is this where I'm supposed to be? I
Mhm.
know I had this dream. I
Mhm.
didn't know that those were confirmed through other people, but I remember when
That's
I first,
crazy, dude. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it for sure was. It was definitely like a surprise, especially because like my wife was going through photos because she
Mhm.
was like, there's no way they're gonna pick out different people because in the photos that I had, the only photos that they had of me was like, kind of like my hair is now,
Mhm.
and not long, like kind of bleached
Yeah.
hair, whatever,
Yeah.
whitish, I guess.
Yeah.
And all of them were like, "That's the one," he's coming. And so
Wow.
I really didn't know what that meant. And that's not to put any kind of like special preference on me. I think it was just like a confirmation of like what the spirit was speaking,
Mm.
and kind of purpose
Mm.
for me and my path, and even just the way it was aligning with other people. So
Mm.
um, when I was there, I was having all these doubts and kind of what am I supposed to be doing, and am I supposed to be here? And it was really like God was using, which I think is like one of the most beautiful things. I'm sure you can kind of speak into this too, like when you see other people being used on your behalf, and when
Mhm.
you see
Yeah.
that the Spirit speaking to them, that gives you something that like you need.
Yeah.
And like even as I'm there and I'm like just feeling this guilt of like, and it was like costly for me to come over here, even just
Yeah.
for like a trip. And
Uh-huh.
um like it would have been, just seeing kind of the suffering and
Yeah.
seeing the,
Uh-huh.
the the position that a lot of people were in. I was like, man, it would have been better if I wouldn't have even come.
Mhm.
And like right then, this little
Mhm.
girl came up and she's like, I know that it's really expensive in order to come over here, but we need love more. And I'm just like, just like
So
puddles.
that was in Uganda. Yeah,
Yeah, and
when
that
you were
was
in
in
Uganda.
Uganda. And that was
Yeah.
like that was actually like the first day I was there.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And so we were, and so it was like one thing after another, and we were brought in and really kind of, I was like poured into in a way that like people were speaking things over my life
Mm.
that no one else could have known.
Mm.
It was like even when I was going through that difficult time with my friend, it was like this was when I was on my knees being like God, like where are you?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the
Yeah.
midst of this.
Yeah.
And so I'll fast forward on that first trip, but on that last day over there, we ended up visiting a hospital, and like I said, my wife, was a teacher, and she's like, we're just going to visit here. We visit here, every so often, and
Mm-hmm.
so we had a man that was there that was a translator, and
Mm-hmm.
another man that was there as well, and
Mm-hmm.
so we're sitting over this boy who had sickle cell anemia,
Mm.
and he was kind of just like on his side in this like comatose state. And the doctor had come over and just said like his organs are shutting down. He's not going to make it till the morning. And
Mm-hmm.
then I just remember like his mom sitting there, just weeping over him. And I'm getting this like kind of like PTSD. Like this just feels exactly like what I kind of just went through. And I felt this like extreme hopelessness.
Mm.
Uh, of even just like those thoughts going through my mind of like I've tried other things. I've done what I thought I could do in my
Mm-hmm.
own strength
Mm-hmm.
in order to see healing occur, and it just wasn't working. And so my wife was praying, there were other people praying, and I remember that thought in my head of being like I don't really think it works,
Mm.
and like I said, just feeling hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
And so we moved on from that first boy, and we're praying. They're praying for another little boy who was like laying in that same kind of comatose state. And as I'm like looking over, I have my sunglasses. They're leaning right here, and they literally just flew off and hit this little kid like in the head, and kind of like woke him up out of this stupor. And so I'm sitting here. I'm just standing there like. And I remember that like initial like what the heck is going on. I wasn't like leaning or anything like
It
that.
just like came off, and
It just came off. And
yeah.
so in that moment, I always explain to people like I've done a lot of stuff that I've seen the spiritual realm opened
Mm.
up, but I've never still to this day to that extent I've never experienced anything like that.
Mm.
And it was like everything shifted, and
Mm.
I watched, like I couldn't see my wife there anymore. I couldn't see the translators and
Mm-hmm.
people that were around us,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt physical hands pushing me back to that first boy.
Mm.
And I'm sitting on the bed, and I'm feeling like I don't know what to say,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just like a fountain, like words are coming out of me, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like I don't even know what to do. And then I
Mm-hmm.
felt, no joke, like physical hands over mine,
Mm.
putting them over his chest and over the side of his head, and then
Mm.
it was like an electrical current. I felt like a rod,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just like surging. And
Mm.
so this boy who was in this like comatose state kind of like and just completely woke up.
Wow.
I watched like the fever completely break,
Yeah.
and um, wow, I'm like laughing, we're like crying, and then we're in communication. We're talking back and forth, and we were talking for a little while, and um, I still couldn't see anyone around me, and then
Mm-hmm.
everything just shifted sort of back to normal. I
Mm.
could see mom there, and my wife, it was just a friend at the
Yeah.
time, and the translator was standing there,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm speaking, back and forth to this boy, and I'm like, oh, I don't really understand like what he's saying. And so I'm looking at the translator, and he's translating for me. And then it just kind of keeps going back and forth. And so I look over, and I'm like, hey, why isn't he speaking English anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, he doesn't speak any English.
Mm.
And what I experienced was, which I didn't, it was like kind of like mind blowing, but I
Yeah.
like a lapse in, um, language,
Yeah.
barriers. And
Mm-hmm.
so I walked out of there being like, not only was like, wow, this boy, I know for a fact was totally healed.
Hmm.
But I knew it wasn't me. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
like wasn't anything that I possessed that was like
Hmm.
different than anyone else. If I
Yeah.
just felt like I was a conduit
Yeah.
for something great, for something greater to come through. And
Yeah.
so, um, yeah, I ended up finding out like it was funny because it wasn't until I got back, and so I heard from the guy who was the translator, and he's like, I went into the village, and there he is out there playing soccer, completely
That's
healthy.
crazy, dude. Yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason why I wanted to get you on this call, because like when you told me about your experiences in Uganda, I was like, holy crap. Yeah. So I wanna back up a little bit because that's a pretty remarkable story. So from what I recall, you told me this is like when you first got to Uganda. You were like, okay, I guess I'll just go to Uganda, and then you got to Uganda. You started talking to that little girl that said, all we need is your love. So can you tell me about why you went in the first place? Because I want to sort of get into the experiences with the witch doctors, and what you learned from your experiences with there, and sort of what you experienced with the people there and why they do what they do. And maybe you could talk about the story about how you met your wife, because that's a really crazy story when that lady walked out of the wow, dude. Yeah, no, I had to get this on film because this is just incredible. So yeah, I'll let you go for it.
Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I came back from that first trip. I was only there for 7 days.
Oh, so
Um,
you returned back. Okay, I
Yeah,
didn't
so
know
I
that. Okay.
returned back, and I was in California
Hmm.
for I think it was only like 2 months or so. Like when
Hmm.
that was my last night when I
Mm.
experienced that. That was like the last day I was there. We met and had dinner with friends right afterwards, and then
Hmm.
I came back home, and I
Hmm.
just knew there was like this, that was like constant confirmation, like this is where I'm supposed to be,
Mm. Hmm.
and I don't know what that looks like. I don't even know what I have to offer,
Hmm.
and so, but I just know I'm supposed to be here.
Hmm.
And so I came back for a little while, and like I said, my wife was a teacher at the school over there,
Hmm.
and so I reached out to the directors in the United States and uh, the directors in Uganda
Hmm.
and spoke with them and just said, listen, like I know I'm not in a place in what I carry, you know, is someone who's like trained in a lot of this stuff, but I
Hmm.
really do feel a calling, and I would love to help in any way that I can. It doesn't
Hmm.
have to mean, a classroom. It can be whatever.
Hmm.
But I really feel like God's calling me to be over there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so um, like I said, I was back in the US for a little bit and
Uh-huh.
then flew back out there, and I, I kind of, it was funny because the directors there ended up being uh, like spiritual parents in a way, like in the way of like showing me a deeper realm of spirituality than I could experience with my eyes.
Hmm.
And um, the 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 wife of the man, it was their name is Ron and Joy, but her name Joy, her name is Joy, and she saw so clearly in the spiritual realm. And I remember seeing people come in, whether it was physical ailments or something deeper,
Hmm.
and I don't know if you know a little bit about Uganda, if you know a little bit about Coney and what had
Hmm.
happened there as far as the history,
Yep.
or even just people listening. But um, there was a uh, there's something called the LRA, and they came in and they basically trained child soldiers, and they would do like the most horrible, despicable things to not just kids but women, and they would take the kids in order to raise them up in the army, and they would just give them weapons, and they would come in and they would spread out throughout Uganda and do stuff that like I mean, they would just cut off limbs or cut off, lips or nose or whatever they could find in order to leave people deformed. And so the previous generation was really in a place of extreme trauma from what they had endured.
Hmm.
And the man Joseph Kony, who was leading the entire thing, a lot of people think he's actually still alive and in South Sudan,
Mm.
hiding out over there.
Mm.
Excuse me. But I remember I used to hear the wildest stories. So he had a lot of different wives. One of them worked at a place near us, and she had said that he was more demon than he was man. And so what
I
she
mean,
meant by that,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, with the
yeah.
stuff he was doing, I mean, it's like there's no need to get into the gruesome details,
Mhm.
and but she would say like she'd be standing there right next to him, and she'd watch as people would shoot him, and bullet holes would go through him,
Mm.
and nothing would happen to him,
Wow.
or would watch things like he would disappear from one area and then reappear in a completely different area.
So this
It's
was your mentor that was running the event. This was running the thing in Uganda. The wife of the man that was running this
he was running the school, and
the
basically
school.
that,
Okay.
yeah, and that was started during the war.
Hmm.
Um, the Ugandan soldiers had gone to Congo, and they
Hmm.
had impregnated a lot of the Congolese women there.
Hmm.
And then when they came back after the war had ended,
Hmm.
the women from Congo, had children with
Hmm.
them, and so they migrated to Uganda, and they kind
Hmm.
of became like pushed away by the society there and very much looked down on. And
Hmm.
so their kids couldn't get an education.
Hmm.
They were left in like the slums of the slums.
Hmm.
And so the directors of the school were actually from Kenya, and they saw what was going on there and
Hmm.
came down and started teaching, these kids English under a mango tree. And
Wow.
then it
Yeah.
developed into something bigger where it was like they weren't, it became a school where they weren't
Hmm.
just getting an education, they were getting a meal, they
Hmm.
were getting clothing,
Hmm.
and they were getting spiritual and care, and even
Yeah.
just kind of working through things like trauma. And they
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
specifically positioned the school right next to one of the darkest places in Uganda, in terms of witch doctors. So like right at the epicenter, right at the heart of where a lot of this stuff was going on, they're like, this is where we're going to put the school, and
Hmm.
it's going to be a beacon of light
Mm.
in the
Beautiful. Yeah.
darkness.
That's awesome.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I mean, you leave those school walls and you take a left like a couple steps,
Hmm.
and that's where a lot of the witch doctors lived. And
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, so when you returned back to Uganda, you went right back to the school. Did they set you up with any particular job, or any particular type of instruction, or you just kind of were like, I'm here for whatever you need? Like, what did they typically have you do on a day-to-day basis?
yeah, I mean, it started out, they would just help. They had me sort of shadow my wife for a little bit and just see what she was doing. And I was supposed to be like the male counterpart to what she was doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so they had a lot of women teaching at the school, but really no men.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were wanting was like someone that a lot of the boys could like connect with,
Yeah.
and even just the girls in a way that it was healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big thing over there too is like there's a lot of sexual trauma, and so being in a position where it was like um, where I could kind of come in
Mm-hmm.
and love them in a way that was healthy,
Yeah.
and normal.
Totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what they wanted me to do is to
Yeah.
come in there and just be like, hey,
Yeah.
listen, whether it's teaching in the classrooms, whether it's
Yeah.
just loving on the kids,
Uh-huh.
I mean, they really gave me a lot of freedom, even in the ways that like certain things might have been cultural taboos.
Yeah.
I just felt led, like I'm like, oh, I just, they were like, go for it, and they really trusted me in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
which was amazing, even just for my own growth. And
Yeah.
so they really, I think the best way to put it is they pushed me into the deep end. They put me in
Yeah.
situations that like I didn't know how to deal with it, and I
Yeah.
really had to learn on the fly.
You just had to
And so
swim. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
sink or swim.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd meet there with the directors, and they'd spend a lot of time with me, which was amazing, just kind
Mm-hmm.
of pouring into me and even just teaching me the things that they knew and
Yeah.
how to counteract the things that they were experiencing.
Mm.
What it looked like to pray over these kids, and what it looked like to enter into um, the spiritual realm, in
Mm.
terms of like there is a battle going on
Mm-hmm.
over each and every one of us, and
Mm-hmm.
what does it look like to have protection? What does it
Mm.
look like to
Yeah.
exorcise the
Yeah.
demon?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. That's so cool that you had that role because, you know, when I first met you, I mean, you're a couple of years older than me. And when I first met you, I felt like you and our other friend Chris were really sort of like older brothers to me. So it sort of it sort of makes sense in a way that you sort of filled that role perfectly for the kids in Uganda. That's super awesome. Yeah. So I want to hop into a little bit. So I didn't know you're filling in some of the gaps of the stories that I didn't know, which is pretty cool. So they set up the school that was sort of in this epicenter of these witch doctors. Now I want you to talk a little more about, first and foremost, like what this was all about. Was this like Ifa? Was this some kind of voodoo that they were doing? How prevalent was it, and why they did it in the first place? So maybe you can elaborate a little more on your experiences about that. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I think it's really interesting when you go over there, because when you come to the United States, you have people from all different beliefs, but you also have atheists. You have people who don't believe in any kind of spiritual realm whatsoever. And it's like, once this is done, you're in the dirt, that's it. And I remember having conversations with people there on both sides, and it just like blew their mind. Like, they're like, you have people that don't believe in anything.
Yeah.
And there was such a parallel between the two. Like,
Yeah.
I always say there was a, when people go over there, they'll see miracles, they'll see signs and wonders and things like that. But what I noticed, and being over there, was it wasn't any different than what we have here. There was just a greater expectancy for the ways that the spirit could break through into the physical. And so we have a lot of, this is just my opinion, but we have a lot of comforts. We have a lot of things that create barriers in our lives. And so because of that, it becomes a lot more difficult to get to the deeper things. So, a lot of people would even say like, well, are there people that are dealing with spiritual warfare or demons or things like that over here? And of course there are, absolutely. But the difference is we have all of these things that act as barriers, whether they're comforts, to where there's nothing to lean on. And so being over there, you leaned on one or the other, and you had two choices. And so for a lot of the women, that I talked to, or mothers, they'd say like, listen, I had two choices. One is like, I would pray that God would provide for me and that I would see my needs met, and know that I could very well, like, I don't know what's going to happen on that side. Or I can go to a witch doctor and I can see those needs met. And I think at first I was like, well, because we'd see some of these women go back, to those same places that they were in before, and they'd gain this freedom, and then they'd go back into this place of depression. And so, I'd ask them like, why would you choose to go back to that? And which is something where it's like, I'll never be in that position. So it was a little hard to, judge them even when they're in that, but they're like, when my child's sick, and I don't have the money to take them to a doctor, and I don't know whether they're going to survive the night, I have an option, and I know that will work. And so I go to that. And so they would go to these witch doctors because they would see results, and there was an instant gratification. And I think that was the enticing part about it. As far as what they were practicing, it was anything from, incantations to using charms. Charms is a big part of it. They would use a lot of the symbolism, or they would invoke certain spells into things that they would wear on them, and bring them certain places. And I remember, like, I didn't actually see any of that stuff on my first trip, but when I came back the second time, and I saw people like manifesting, I was like, there's no way. Like, it was so demonstrative, and I'd never seen anything like that in the United States. It's just like, there's no way.
So what do you think they were tapping into? Because to me, it seems like they're really tapping into some dark stuff. And from what I know about this stuff is the reason why people do these things in the first place is because it works, but at what cost, right? So what you were saying, that they use these spells, but what, in your opinion, what did you think you were seeing?
And what do you mean, like, what I was saying?
So, like, what type of energy do you think that these witch doctors were working with? Because from what you've told me in the past, it seemed like it was really dark stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were, I mean, they were fully open about contacting demonic entities.
Mm.
And so they would go into the spiritual realm, they would seek them out,
Hmm.
and there was always a price. And a lot of times, it could be something as simple as, um, leaving, like money for the, because I think that's the thing too, is like the witch doctors were oftentimes, they were filled with those spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't even a contacting them. A lot of times when you meet them,
Hmm.
the type of um, deliverance or exorcisms
Hmm.
that would have to be performed on them
Hmm.
were pretty strenuous and kind of oftentimes took a long time because um, they were so filled. And
On
there
the
were
witch doctors. You're talking the exorcisms on the witch doctors. Okay. Okay.
yeah. And so I mean, there were certain ones where it was like they would gain that sense of freedom, and some
Hmm.
of them didn't remember years of their life.
Mm.
Where it was like I was in a different country last time I was conscious.
Mm.
And the best way that I can explain it is it's like, um,
They would forget. So there would just be time periods where they wouldn't even. So it's almost like the soul stepped out in a way, and something else stepped.
exactly. So it steps back
Wow. Yeah.
and they step
Yeah.
forward and they become the controlling factor. And it's a decision. And that's where it is. It's like, I think with anything evil, it always comes down to consent. There
Mhm.
has to be some type of consent.
Yeah.
And that's how
Hmm.
they get you is they'll give you something enticing.
Hmm.
It can be something physical or
Yeah.
it can be knowledge. And I think that for a lot of people, it's like, well, I really want to know my future. I really want to know this and that. And so
Hmm.
they'll try to find that information. Well, any demon can understand information
Hmm.
because they've been walking the earth for quite a long time. It's not very difficult for them to gain any type of information,
Hmm.
whether it's about you personally.
Hmm.
The amount of times where it was like my wife would be walking around places and certain people that were filled with those spirits knew her, identified her, and
Hmm.
would, I mean, chase her down.
Mm.
And
That must have been really unsettling. So, did you have those experiences? My God, like, did you have those experiences a lot where people would come to you, like demon-filled witch doctors, and they'd just be harassing you? Yeah.
yeah, I had it happen quite a few times.
Hmm.
One of the more interesting ones. I was at the market, and it's
Hmm.
basically just this huge like concrete,
Hmm.
slab or whatever, and everyone
Hmm.
just kind of sets up
Hmm.
different types of food, and I'm in there grabbing different things, and
Hmm.
I'm going to get eggs, and this woman looks over me, and she starts speaking in Acholi, which is the native language in Uganda where we were, and she's pointing at me as she's saying these things.
Hmm.
And I'm looking over at Lauren and I'm looking around me and I'm just like, something's off. Like you could
Hmm.
feel a shift.
Hmm.
And so I'm looking up at the woman who's selling eggs and she was like, I would leave if I were you. She's speaking curses over you.
Hmm.
And I had, that's a story in itself, but I hadn't dealt with, this was the point where I hadn't dealt with high order type stuff up until
Hmm.
that point.
Hmm.
And she was definitely someone in a higher order,
Hmm.
in terms of the authority that I had at that point.
Hmm.
And I was like laying on a bed in so much pain for like 7 days straight.
Are you talking
Couldn't
like spiritual authority? Like she had a higher. Yeah. Okay.
spiritual authority. Yeah. So that there's that saying like new level, new devil.
Hmm.
And I
Interesting.
think
Yeah.
as we gain that new spiritual authority,
Hmm.
we have authority over them. And I think I was just in that place of beginning to, because the authority is given to us, but
Hmm.
it's the belief in the authority. And
So,
I think,
mm,
yeah.
yeah. So what in your opinion, because I talk about this a lot in some of the videos, like where do you think this authority comes from? Because I'm trying to really get at that heart of what you think. So in your opinion, where did you get authority to have command over these energies? You're saying new level, new devil, right? So in your opinion, where does this authority come from? From love? Does it come from like Jesus or some other type of holy entity? Like nothing's off the table here because I'm trying to figure this out too,
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Hmm.
Yeah. Just being like completely honest. Yeah. It comes from Christ.
Yeah.
So I like I said, I had tried different things
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't experiencing breakthrough. I wasn't experiencing power
Mm-hmm.
in terms of seeing it affecting other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really what it did is it like it minimalized me. It minimalized the sense of like
Mm-hmm.
I can do this on my own,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And when I'm in those situations, it's like, you know, like we're in a classroom one day and we were speaking about spiritual freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and certain kids started like fully manifesting, and
What do you mean by that exactly?
manifesting like so what happens is a lot of these kids will go to witch doctors. Their
Mm-hmm.
parents will take them or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's
Mm-hmm.
good luck or even like we want you to have favor with your teachers, good
Mm-hmm.
grades, things like
Mm-hmm.
that, and so they'll take them, you know, to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll watch a switch, and
Mm-hmm.
you can, for me, like you can see it in the eyes. Their eyes switch. They
Mm-hmm.
like their pupils change.
Mm-hmm.
Everything changes. You can see a physical like, and I don't know if it's like a spiritual sight thing, but I just know like I can. It's like you can start to tell something's happening and there's a shift occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it's that like, you know, you're in the forefront and now you're
Then
being
you
pushed
step back.
and
Interesting.
they're coming forward.
Interesting.
There's
Yeah.
certain things
Yeah.
that trigger that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was happening is we were seeing manifestations in the terms of manifesting in like they were coming to the forefront while the person
Mm.
was in the background.
So they'd start like acting out in class, maybe. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like to the point where they would be screaming, they'd be speaking in like unknown languages.
Mm.
They would be attacking other kids, and what they try to do too is they try to jump from bodies. So
Interesting. Mm.
when they see that they're gonna be exercised and they're
Mm-hmm.
gonna have to leave that body,
Mm-hmm.
they will look to the nearest person to
Mm.
skip to them. And what they look for is a frailty in I don't know if the right word is character, or like for instance, like um,
Like spiritual discipline, a lack of spiritual, like
yeah,
holisticness. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So like let's say for like one of the people, like one of the girls, it was like a sexual trauma, and there was
Mm.
something that was believed, there was a consent that happened,
Mm.
and so it will look for that same type of belief system to jump
Interesting.
because it gains that consent immediately. It doesn't have to do
Mm.
anything, and so
Wow,
they'll try
that's
to find
powerful.
bodies so that you
Yeah.
can't find where it's coming from. And so yeah, I mean, it was everything from like seeing kids levitate, flown across the room. You know, like things that like with your physical eyes, you're just like, am I seeing this?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
because it goes beyond that, and
Mhm.
that yeah, and that's where it was like they're playing on a different level than I think what we're used to.
Yeah. Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
but like from my stance, it's like
Yeah.
God's bigger, and so when
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
understand and you come into that agreement
Hmm.
where you're like, I believe it,
Yeah.
you know, so I'd have to see certain circumstances like that,
Hmm.
and I'd see that my faith wasn't strong enough in
Mm.
terms of like, you know, I'd be looking
Mm.
at those scenarios, and for a moment, I would feel that fear, you know,
Yeah,
because
I
like,
believe it. Yeah.
you
Hmm.
know, like there's 15 kids in here
Hmm.
that oh that's another thing too. The strength is unreal.
Mm.
Like you have a 15-year-old girl,
Hmm.
and we had like 8 people holding her down,
Hmm.
and like couldn't even hold her down because she was
Mm.
too strong. The
Wow.
strength becomes supernatural.
Yeah.
And
I
so
wanted to ask a specific question before I forget, because this is a very vital point. Um, when you say that that this authority came from Christ, I want to make a big distinction. Are you talking about this idea of Christ consciousness, or are you literally talking about the physical being Jesus Christ, or you think they're both? In your opinion, because in my thought process, the name of Jesus seems to have certain power and authority over things, and I've postulated as to why that is. But in your opinion and experience, what do you think that is?
yeah, it's funny. Yeah, it's funny you say that because I mean I used to think the same thing. I'm like, what's the power in the name? But
Mm,
it was strange. Like you'd see the ways that, I mean, I could say any name,
mm-hmm,
but then when you'd say Jesus, it was like they were tormented by that. And
mm-hmm.
I'm like, why is that?
Yeah,
And I think
that's yeah, yeah,
yeah, it was just kind of like, whoa, you know.
yeah. Mm-hmm,
The way that I look at it is there's three, and this is just in my own walk and like kind of trying to understand all of this, is like there's three different levels of like who Christ is. And you have the physical embodiment, which is walked in flesh, walked amongst us. And really up until that point in history, you know, there's lots of different ideologies, but there wasn't anything specific that showed everything in human form in terms of how you are not just empowered by your mind or discipline or things like that, but how it goes beyond that. And so it was a, you know, like a mirroring of what we're supposed to desire to walk in. You know? And there's that verse where it says like, you shall do greater things. And I think the greater things also has to do with the numbers, you know, because like when we're unified, it becomes something greater, to where, you know, it's not just one person. So there's the personal Christ, there's the personal Jesus Christ who walked the earth. And really, I do think there is a power over the land in terms of that. And in using terminology and using the name, these spirits know it. And I would just, you know, and you can tell because you can use any other name and it doesn't do jack.
So if you say in the name of Buddha or you say in the name of Allah, it doesn't do anything. But the second you say in the name of Jesus, they scramble. Interesting. It's not the name of Christ, it's the name of Jesus. So you could say in the name of Christ and it won't do anything?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not even necessarily that. But yeah, like when we would use the name of Jesus, it would be a different reaction. I mean, you could say Buddha, say whatever you want, and nothing, you know, like.
Yeah.
And so that's really like when I talk about being thrown into the deep end, that's what it looked like for me, because it was like sink or swim. And so, you know, it's like, try whatever. And I'm like, well, none of this is working.
Yeah. So burning white sage ain't going to work. Exactly. Burn your sage, you know.
That, you know, like, and I thought that this helps with all this stuff was like out the door, and it wasn't helping with any of it. And so, you know, I think that there's different levels of kind of understanding even like who Jesus was, who Christ was, because we have the physical Jesus. There's actually a story in it. I actually really like this one where I think kind of explains it, you know, fairly well, where it talks about how Jesus brought 3 disciples with him. He was standing up and his body became like lightning. And with that, you know, like it was transparent, you know, you could see through him. And it said at his sides stood Moses and Elijah, which, you know, if you know a little
prophets,
bit about those were the prophets. Yeah. And those were like the figureheads of the Jewish, you know, religion. And so if you go back and you read that, you can see what he was showing them is I am beyond time itself. And I am here just as I was there and I was there, and I can collect these now, you know, because I'm the pillar in a sense that holds all these things together. So like I said, there's that physical, but at the same time, it surpasses that into there's a greater spiritual Christ that presides over everything. But I think because we're human, because we're flesh and blood, there's a power in terms of the authority that we hold in, you know, in proclaiming that. And I do know too, there's certain verses where, you know, where it was like, even, you know, that's where I want to be. You know, my wife and I talk about that all the time, where it was like, Jesus would just say a word, you know, he wouldn't say like, in my name, you know, like all it was a word, and it was like the demon possessed, you know, seeing people healed, all those sorts of things. But I do think that there is a process that we have to go through. Sanctification. There is a deep cleansing that needs to happen in our spirit and in our psyche to align with who God is, because we have to understand him from a micro level before we can understand him on a macro level. And I think when we start at a smaller place and we're like, you know, we're understanding and we fully can comprehend what it looks like to walk in physical flesh and be aligned with the Father. Like I love that verse where it says, you know, when they were talking to Jesus, and he says, I do nothing unless I hear the Father say it, which means there was nothing that he did and nothing that he said that he didn't see the God of everything around us, the spiritual principle that presides over everything, directing him towards it. And so,
Yeah.
like when we get to that place, it becomes a whole different story. Our authority rises, and
Yeah.
and yeah,
Interesting.
those things aren't an issue
So,
then.
because this has been one of the things I've really been trying to get at is this. I've been really been trying to bridge this whole idea of the new age, 5D ascension to the actual Jesus character of the biblical rapture, and I'm really kind of on a quest for that. I'm actually reading the Ancient Flower of Life, Drunvalo Melchizedek. He's like one of the big new age guys, and he's got a lot of really great stuff. It's not to say that there's not any credibility in that, and I'm also reading the Bible as well at the same time. But I guess in your experiences, because you've had more direct experiences with actually exorcising demons in the name of Jesus, so you think it more has to do with the actual person as opposed to the spirit, or do you think they're sort of like one and the same, like this whole idea of Christ consciousness? Because I think this idea of Christ consciousness is more of like the Holy Spirit. It's just another different name for the Christ consciousness. And even Jesus says in the Bible, he says, you will do greater things than myself, right? So you can have the Holy Spirit working through you. But I wonder if like this physical incarnation of Jesus allowed for the Spirit to come into other people's lives. Like that, you couldn't really access that before. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm not biblically versed enough to be able to talk on that. But in your opinion, what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you mean.
Yeah.
I think that, like I was saying, I think there's different levels. So I think that the physical is important, and I do think that there was an unlocking. When
Mm,
it talks about, it says when he died, he went down and he grabbed the keys in hell, and then
mm,
came back and then gave it to us.
mm,
And there's something about that, whether you can
mm,
look at that in a like a this happened exactly, or you can see it metaphysically, or
mm.
really both.
Yeah, or both.
You
Yeah.
see that there is a significance to what that looks like, because it means we didn't hold the keys of authority up until
Mm.
that point. So really,
Interesting. Yeah.
mankind was scrambling to try to gain some type of upper edge over these beings that had were walking the earth in spiritual form for
Mm-hmm.
eons, in the
Yeah.
past. And so when you talk about like Christ consciousness, I think that's like the threefold. They talk about like the Trinity
The
or
Father,
whatever.
Son, Holy Spirit. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And so um, uh, Christ would be the physical embodiment, the Holy Spirit would be the expression, and
Mm-hmm.
God would be the presiding everything that exists
Mm.
all around. And
The universe or mass
yeah,
consciousness, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So they look different. They seemingly serve different purposes,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really aligned in the same thing.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to that other than for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that I have leaned on things in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen breakthrough in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
But when I leaned into this, and at one point I just said, okay, I have tons of questions. I have tons of things that
Yeah.
like aren't adding up, don't make sense. Things I've heard from other people that are
Mm-hmm.
conflicting.
Mm-hmm.
Even in research.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really had to lay those things aside, and I spent a period where I was like, I'm gonna put books to the side for right now, because I love information, I love learning, but I need to get acquainted with what it looks like to communicate with the Holy Spirit. Because
Mm.
if I can communicate with the Spirit, then I know that I'm tapped into a wisdom that's beyond me.
Yeah,
And
you don't need any books. It's like you get the information right there. It's
yeah,
just it's useless.
yeah,
Books are
yeah.
useless. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. And
Mm.
that confirmation is experiential, which I think
Mm-hmm.
that's like um that to me is like I learn that way.
Mm.
I'll go through it, and then I'll either be like, all right, I need to definitely do that differently, or oh, that actually worked out a lot better than I thought
Mm.
it would.
Mm. Yeah.
So it really comes down to, I think, everyone going on their journey and experiencing. So like for me, it was a uh as silly as this sounds, treating the spirit like it was a person and having a conversation. Because if I'm like, you know, um, we have a friendship,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's something like a deeper friendship.
Mm.
There's people that it's like my wife and I like have
Mm-hmm.
a friendship where it's like we talk every day.
Mm-hmm.
We're like constantly like everything that happens in our day, kind of unloading it, and it's like, where is the level of relationship that we have with the Spirit of all things
Mm,
in terms of setting aside knowledge and then turning it into relationship? And
mm,
I think that those two things can kind of get in, like for me, it's like everything in me. I don't know if you know anything about like Enneagram. It was always like it became really fascinating for me. I was a five on it, but it was basically like information is really like, it's I have this gravitational pull towards information,
mhm,
and a part of it comes from that dark side or that shadow side of it is
mhm.
like I want to know because I want to feel secure in the knowing. You know,
Dude, I feel you, man.
yeah,
But no matter how much you read, you're like, I don't know.
yeah. I feel like I feel like I'm more confused now.
Yeah, dude. I feel you on that. I totally feel you on that, man. I get it for sure. I think that's why we resonate with each other so much. I mean, we met over a book, for God's sakes, you know. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I wanted to bring up an interesting point because I'm really glad that you brought this up. That when you say like Jesus came down to hell and brought the keys to bring it back up. I was talking with one of my mentors here, who's a really brilliant woman, and I didn't actually know this because she has a big background in studying Hinduism. She studied Tantra and stuff like that in India. And she mentioned something to me about Yogananda, and how Yogananda was like super big into Jesus. And Yogananda said something really interesting about how the actual death of Christ took on the collective karma of the people of the earth, because he was such an advanced being, could take on that massive amount of karma of the people on the earth. And it's interesting how you were talking about, in order to be able to get to that Christ spirit within you, you have to have a cleaned vessel, right? Your vessel has to be clean spiritually and maybe even physically sometimes. And how it's interesting how that being could take on such karma and sort of clean up the air, clean up the energy so that people could tap into that. It was a very interesting insight that you brought up, and kind of bridging that with what she was telling me. So what do you think about that?
No, I think that's really interesting. I just as like a side note, I do think that like relationship starts with where we're at. I don't think it looks like us cleaning anything up. I don't think it
Mm,
looks like any of that for relationship to start. I think
mhm,
that you can start right where you at. You
mhm,
don't need to be in this place of, and I think that's kind of the lie where I was, where I was like, man,
mhm,
I need to clean up my act, and even
mhm,
kind of being a little bit, into the new age movement. I was
mhm,
like, I need to be enlightened, or I need to be
mhm,
in this place where I am like
mhm,
spiritually, in the know in
mhm,
order to feel like content.
mhm,
And it really starts with where you're at. And
mhm,
I think that it's not a sense of like even the story of Jesus, the people that he took in were the worst of the worst. They
mhm.
were the people that were shunned and
Yeah.
cast away from society. And there's like a line that someone said, which I really like this, where he said, he even brought in Judas, who
Mhm.
was the guy that betrayed him.
Yeah.
And Peter was the one who ended up having this massive transformation. He
Mhm.
sold him out initially too, but then he ended up going out and was like healing people, and people were seeing radical stuff happen and seeing
Mhm.
God's presence spread throughout the earth.
Mhm.
And you can't have a Peter without a Judas. And
Mm.
so there's
Interesting.
these interesting parallels between the two. But I do think that, like we're saying, I don't want to get too off track, but kind of what you're saying with what she was explaining to you, I do believe that what he was doing was taking on, you can say it's sins or karma,
Mhm.
or
Mhm. Mhm.
different terms, but
Mhm.
um, he was taking that on
Mhm.
and transmuting it.
Mhm.
And for the first time, humanity had like let's take the Jewish people for instance. Their that the term scapegoat actually comes from the Jewish people, because they would put their sins on a goat,
Mhm.
and they would have it leave the land.
Mhm.
And so that's where the term came from. And so they believed that they had to sacrifice. They believed
Mhm.
that it came from blood,
Mhm.
because, in the same way it was like, well, if we can sacrifice, if we can do this and this,
Mhm.
then those sins can be transferred
Mhm.
and it can leave us. And that was the
Yeah.
belief You know,
That's sort of they still do that today. I think the Hasidic Jews in New York, I forgot, Yom Kippur or something like that. They'll like put the little chicken around their head and they'll like pray, and they think that they're like transferring their sins to this chicken. I'm like, all right, you know, like whatever. I don't know about that, but
I think too, like you have a not to speak to that specifically, but I think that for quite a long time, you have a people really like desperate to find something more. They were desperate to search out their own salvation, whatever that looked like. And salvation in the sense of true spiritual freedom, walking in the empowerment that we were born to walk in. And I think that I really do believe that's what was given to us. And that was the transaction that was really transmuted in that occurrence. And so in that moment, you know, something shifted, even you could say energy.
Uh-oh. Yeah. So I'm sorry. So you got cut off a little bit. So you said even energetically what?
Something shifted, not just with us as individuals, but also with mankind. I'm sorry, not mankind, but also with the earth itself. So there is a correspondence, you know, with what we have in terms of the earth and the history of mankind, and whether it's the sins that we carry on, you know, through our forefathers. I do believe that there was this purification that occurred. And really, it's you name it and you claim it. Like it is all you have to do is reach out, and you have that same sanctification. You have that same purifying. You don't need to be in this place. And I think that's where I got caught up in the New Age movement, like pretty far on that, just in the sense of believing like I have to get to this place, and then I'm going to feel this spiritual enlightenment. Then I'm going to feel like I'm constantly in the now, or things don't bother me and I don't get angry or whatever, you know, like, instead this was totally different, because it was like, I'm going to take you as you are, and with all your flaws, and it's not going to look like this process where everything's going to be perfect, but it is.
I'm sorry, brother.
It's all good. It's all good.
You're getting cut off a little bit. Yeah. So you say take you as you are, and I'm sorry, like it was getting cut off. I want to make sure it's recorded. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a take you as you are. It's not a. The emphasis is on relationship. It's not based off of knowledge. It's not based off of even sometimes, like, I think we can get caught up with actions. Like, I just needed to do these things, you know, like, whether you're meditating or you're clearing your mind and all that stuff, it's not that these things can't be positive things for you, but I think to only be like, this is the only way, and I will, you know, I'm going to get there eventually. I just got it, you know. I think for me, it was enlightening, just in the sense of I can start right where I'm at. Like, it doesn't look like me being in this place and then I'm going to feel this contentment. Like, I can start where I am, you know? And so I think that's where it was a little bit different than what I was experiencing, and kind of shifted the trajectory of my path.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, that was really great insights. And I really wanted to bring that up in our conversation, because that's sort of what I'm trying to figure out right now, is like that whole aspect of the actual figure of Christ, and what that means, and from an energetic perspective as well as a physical perspective. So let's tie this back in with going back to Uganda, because that's when we got on the call in the first place. But that was very, very insightful and very pertinent, I think. So you were really having these experiences with these demonic entities, but it was only until you were using this name of Jesus that gave you this power over this, right? And so can you tell me your experiences when you were actually using this name to exorcise these demons, and what that felt like, what that looked like, and the process? Did you actually fully exorcise these demons from these people? And what did that feel like? What did that look like? Was there a specific ritual that you had to do in order to make sure that it fully worked, or it was just a matter of saying the name and it was like, bam, it was out? Like, you want to elaborate on that a little?
Yeah. Depends on the level. So
can you elaborate on that?
So sometimes when we would have someone come in, it was a lower level demon,
Mm,
and the spiritual oppression wasn't at that level where they
mm,
were, fully kind of taking control over.
mm-hmm,
So it could be as easily as running through something for 30 minutes or so,
mm,
and seeing freedom.
mm.
Um, Others, it would be different. I think there's a lot of different stories. One I mentioned it briefly was a younger girl who, when everything shifted, um, we had like 8 or 9 fully grown men
Mhm.
trying to hold her in place because she was attacking people like with like superhuman strength, and that took a long time.
Wow.
Uh, and interestingly enough, she actually broke free and then started running into the classrooms to try to spread out what was in her. Like I
Interesting.
said, they
Yeah.
try to find,
Wow. Yeah.
try to jump. And so, um,
We
you,
gonna get you, demon. We gonna
yeah, yeah,
get
yeah,
you. You ain't running away.
yeah, yeah,
You're gonna be
and
delivered.
it's gonna happen. And yeah, I think there's a fear that they kind of experience as well.
Mm,
So it really depended on the situation.
mm,
And like I was saying before, new level, new devil, like
mm,
depending on what it was. They call them like underwater spirits.
mm.
And basically they'd even talk about it like based off the witch doctors, they would explain that there was a hierarchy based off of who you were able to communicate with.
Mm,
And a lot of times they would choose and so we got to pray over quite a few, witch doctors, and see freedom,
mhm,
in them afterwards, where they were
mm,
like beaming lights.
mm,
One woman that was probably one of the most prophetic people that I know in terms of hearing the voice of God and being able to speak things that would be like confirmed every time.
wow.
Um, Used to be a really powerful witch doctor, and
Mhm,
when she gained complete freedom, she realized that there was more than what she was getting, and so she
yeah.
completely turned her life around. And
Mhm,
after that, she used to say like she would hear the audible voice of like the Holy Spirit, and so it
mm,
would speak to her and kind of instruct her on certain things. And it wasn't just information about people, but there
mm,
was a power that um, wasn't negative, wasn't going against people, wasn't
mhm,
taking things away, but was
mhm.
adding to them.
Was that the
Um,
same woman that prophesies about you and your wife? Because that story was
yeah,
crazy itself. Like, I want you to tell that because that blew my mind too when you told me that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Do you want me to get into that?
Yeah, yeah, it's great. I mean, this is so juicy. It's like, how do you not want to talk about this stuff, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, my wife would pray with her and another woman, and when I was coming the second time, they were like they were praying with her, and she would come to this school sometimes. So she lived in this small little hut, and and God would like wake her up in the middle of the night or just talk to her in the day, and she'd be like, okay, like walking miles just to give a certain message, and as soon
Mm,
as she'd walk right back.
mhm,
And so I'd see her come into the school sometimes, and then she'd be praying with my wife and this other woman who was uh, also like just awesome and
mhm,
really powerful in terms of the ways that God used her. But they would pray together, and so I'd always hear it. It was like always this like commotion.
mhm,
And she was Congolese. She was from
mhm,
Congo, and so her husband was a Ugandan soldier, and so she'd come over, and so she had a couple kids here, and she spoke to my wife, and she just said, "There's someone coming." Before I had come over the second time, she said, "There's someone coming over. He's tall."
He's got
Um,
platinum blonde hair.
yeah, yeah. She basically just said, like,
Yeah,
this is your husband. My wife is actually from California, so
yeah.
she was yeah, as a teacher, and And so she said, he's coming over here, and God has scales over his eyes. And so he's not going to be able to see you as his wife yet, but God will remove them at a certain point in time that he's ordained, and he'll see you in that moment, like in an instant, and you'll just know.
Wow.
And so I didn't know any of this stuff. Like, like we were just really close friends at that point.
Uh-huh.
And so we did a lot of ministry together, and we were able to like pray for people. And like, it would get to the point where like we'd be teaching in certain classrooms, and then it wasn't just the kids that we were praying over. It would be like their parents, or they would bring people from the community, to where it was like a long line. And towards the end of us staying there, it was like 8 hours a day, constant kind of praying over people, and exorcisms and things like that and stuff. So
you're in high demand, right?
yeah, it was in high demand.
Yeah. You start charging for your services.
Yeah, not for anything we were doing, but just in the ways that God was moving. And and the directors of the school at the time really were just like, they used to be the ones that were doing that, and they were kind of just putting it in our hands and just saying like, we're putting in the deep end. We're going to send them over to you now. When people,
to you or to this lady?
To myself and Lauren. And so that's just like a side note, like, that's what we were doing at the time, when we were at the school. And so we were just close friends. And I came in, I was in someone invited me. They're like, I really want you to come. One of the kids was like, I really want you to come to my church service. And so I'm in the service, and I'm standing there. And dude, it was hot. Like, it was like 110 degrees.
You're in Uganda, bro.
Yeah, I know, but like extra hot, man.
Yeah.
Like it was in, this like tin shack place, and it had to have been at least 110 degrees. And I didn't have shorts on. I had like long khakis, and I was like drenched in sweat. And they're like, we're going to go on, and we're going to be praying and this and that for another like 3 hours. Like, I was in there for like 3.5 hours being like, honestly, like, dude, this is going for a while. Like, I don't know how long I can stand this for. And then the pastor said something about like hearing from God. And he was talking a little bit, I think he was talking a little bit about fasting. And so I'd never fasted before. I didn't even know anything about it. I didn't know that there was any kind of power in it or what it meant. Like, I'd never done it before. And I like felt that inner audible, like that voice that was like, I want you to fast for 3 days, no food, no water, nothing.
Dry fasting, yeah.
And so, I was like, okay, well, I was still kind of developing like that lenience on God in terms of like having relationship and hearing the Holy Spirit like speak. And so I was like, I'm just going to test this, like see what happens after 3 days. And so that was like the longest 3 days. Getting to that point on that third day, I was like, I don't know how I can do this, because it was like we're going through like a heat wave or something, and we're stuck in these classrooms. Like, there's no air or anything. It's just hotter in there, and it's humid, and so.
Let me really test your faith, Dane.
Yeah.
Where's your faith? Crank up the heat, boy.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem like just being like, oh, it's only 3 days. I know people have done like way more than that. But for me, like, I never done anything like it. So it was,
of course.
And so I was in there on the third day, and I'm sitting in the director's office, and I'm like reading something, and they were doing this, like the kids were having like this giant testing, kind of like their SATs in a sense. And so they're like, oh, we're going to pray for them and whatnot. And so they brought me in there, and I'm with them, and I'm like feeling like I'm going to pass out right now. Like, I can't even stand up. There was like 45 minutes in, they're still standing. I'm like, I like need to step out for a second. So I step out, and I'm like sitting there, and I like really feel like I'm like totally going to pass out. And so I might have for a little bit, and then just kind of came back to it, and was like, okay, I'll walk back in. And so I walk back in and I'm like, I can't even like really stand. And so as I'm standing there, the directors of the school, she was like off the charts prophetic, like as well. Like God spoke to her in powerful, powerful ways. And so in the middle of all of that stuff, she grabs this chair while, people are praying this and that. And she grabs this chair in the middle as everyone's like in this circle. And she puts the chair in the middle and she's like, sit. And so I like walked over and I sat down, and she knew nothing about me fasting or anything. I hadn't told anyone about it. Like not even my wife knew, And so I sit down, and then she starts declaring certain things that God was telling her. And she's like, God's saying that we need to pray over him right now. And we're going to talk about like an anointing, basically like using oil to no, it basically is like a how would I explain it?
Like a ritual, like
Yeah,
a symbolic ritual.
yeah, it's symbolic.
Yeah.
It's prophetic in nature in terms of like it's calling forth something bigger that God's doing and calling you into it. And so they talk about two different baptisms, interestingly enough. In the Bible, they talk about like a water baptism,
The baptism of fire. Yeah.
baptism of fire.
Yep.
Yeah. And I had actually never experienced a baptism of fire, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even know what that was or didn't have a context for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so as they were doing this, I was experiencing like my body felt like it was on fire. And
Are you sure it wasn't the 110
I
degree?
know that's how I was
heat?
thinking the whole time, man. I was like, it's got to be the fact that I don't have any food or water in me whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, like I'm feeling a physical hand on my chest, and I thought that the director was like praying over me and just had her hand over me, and I open my eyes for a moment and there's no hand on me, and I'm like tripping out. I'm like, okay, like it must be like I just fasted for too long. I'm like maybe hallucinating or something like that. And then that woman, her name was Anna, the prophet that would pray with my wife, came in, and she said, God has his hand on you. And there's angels in this room right now. And there was someone that was taking a picture. And when he took that picture, there was no light bulb above me, but you could see this giant bluish, like orb, like light that was right there.
Do you have that photo? Because I want to put it in this video. I need these photos.
Yeah,
What?
I'll try to look for the photo.
Yeah.
And so I was having these like spiritual they call it like an infilling of the Holy Spirit, which is basically like the Spirit resides in through you, but really through that power place like in your stomach. I was getting these like contraction type, like it felt like something was actually coming in, and it was I was feeling like peace and just this joy and like so much compassion over my own life that I'm like weeping at that point. Meanwhile, these people are just like pouring oil all over me, and I'm like
kinky.
This like experience, and they're like praying over me and declaring these things, and that's what she felt like, that God was saying to do. Well, in that moment, she's like, it's done. And as soon as she says it's done, I have my eyes closed outside of like opening my eyes briefly for that one moment. And she stepped away, and I literally felt like physical weights come off my eyes. Like I felt like there had been something over my eyes and it had completely just fallen off. And so I'm looking around at people, and I was feeling like I was getting information in the ways that God was speaking to me because I was seeing it over them. And so I went to two people specifically, and I was like, I feel like God's saying this, this, and this. And it was spot on. And for this moment, I was seeing into like a spiritual realm, a deeper thing of like what we carry, and even the ways that like God is orchestrating things so that we can align with those things so that he can do what he does best. as that as that's happening, and I'm like experiencing just, I mean, it was amazing. I walked out after it was all done, and I'm watching my wife, and she's playing with the kids out there, and I'm like, man, like she's so kind. And I think that was always something that I noticed about her, is like the ways that she cared for other people. She really took the time with them. She was never, rushed. Even for me, like I can feel like, all right, like, let's move on and stuff. Like she always was so good at being present with people and just exuding kindness. And so I was like, man, she's so kind. And I'm like, I was like, I really like love that about her. And as I was like saying that, I was like, I really like love her, like as a person. And as I was like in that place, it was like there was this shift. And I knew in that moment, and I like felt God saying strongly, like, that's your wife. And I just, I was kind of like we've been friends, like, for me, I was thinking like, is this going to be weird? Like, am I going to tell her?
Yeah. Hey, you're my wife.
Yeah, like that's so crazy,
Yeah.
And so I'm like, how would I don't know what to do. I'm not going to be the one to bring it up. It's super awkward. And what if I do say something and we have this great friendship, and she's like, no, I don't feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of like hinted at something later. We were talking about something, and because she had prayed with that woman earlier that day, when God had said that's God's. She had come in earlier and said God's going to reveal it to him today.
Yeah.
She knew nothing about the fast or anything like that, but she said, "God told me I have to come over here.
Yeah.
He's revealing it to him today. He's taking the scales off of his eyes, and he's going to reveal to him the fact that you're his wife."
Yeah.
And so she already knew, but she wasn't telling me.
Wow.
Both,
Like she knew it was you, or she knew it was somebody else?
She knew it was me, and we already spoken, but like neither of us are like, like we're both sitting in this room later, and she's like, so what was, kind of like fishing, like, so like telling you and all that stuff. Oh, like some really interesting stuff. Like, what do you know? Like, I was saying, like, what do you know? She's like, oh, nothing, and kind of like brushing it off.
Yeah.
It got to the point where I went home one night, and I went into like, I was praying. I was like, I don't really know what to do about this situation. It just feels like no matter how I would handle this, it would just be so awkward.
Yeah, for sure.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
And so as that happened, I went into this kind of like a trance state where I was seeing something over her life and what God had brought her through in a deeper way that I had really even known the story.
Yeah.
And so I was like, and out of that story, it was like this, this is what I've carried her through, and this is the ways that I'm going to kind of join you guys together.
Wow.
And so I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna bring her to lunch, and I'm just gonna explain to her the dream. And if I explain to her the dream and something clicks, maybe I can try to put that in the conversation afterwards. And so we're sitting at lunch and we're talking about it, and I just I explained the dream to her, and I get to the end of it, and she's just kind of like waiting for me to say it, and she's like, who was the woman in the dream? It had nothing to do about like marriage or anything like that.
Yeah.
Her story. And so I was like, it was you.
Yeah.
And it just opened up this dialogue right afterwards. So she was like, so, and I kind of just like blurted it out. I'm like, yeah, like I had this experience, and God told me that you're my wife, and I know that sounds crazy and this and that. And she just like stopped me, and she's like, he told me the same thing, and God already confirmed it, and he's already spoken to through her name is Anna, who's the prophet, and he's like confirmed it a while ago, and then confirmed that that he was going to confirm it that day and take the scales off your eyes and this and that. And so that's when I was like, talked about scales on my eyes, and just, and so it was like this full confirmation with what I had experienced. And so we kind of joke now, like we fully skipped the, you know, the
Yeah,
usual,
yeah, right.
you
Yeah.
know, and skipped into like, because we kind of ended the conversation. We're like, so are we like engaged now? Or, you know, like,
Yeah,
you know?
forget the butterflies, forget the first dates. You're gonna get the spirit of Christ, and then you're gonna wife her up. We're just cutting right to the quick. No
Yeah,
romance, no nothing. I
yeah.
mean,
We're like, it seems like we're skipping a few steps here.
yeah, yeah, right. Wow, yeah. No, dude, I'm so glad you're able to tell me that story because every time I talk to some of my friends, I'm like, yeah, like I know this guy Dane, and he just tells me these crazy stories. I'm like, what? One of these days I gotta get him on a call because it's just so remarkable. Like these stories are just really amazing. Yeah, wow, that's incredible. So did you guys just like immediately get married, or you're like, yeah, let's hold off a little bit, like?
Well, so we continued kind of like serving over there and like
Uh-huh.
helping at the school, and
Uh-huh.
we came back. That's kind of like, just to shorten it, but it was funny because even the venue for where we got married, we were taking a vacation in Hawaii where my grandparents were taking like our whole family,
Hmm.
and then her family was going to Hawaii also. They had already booked a trip, like both of them had booked it like way before,
Mm,
and they happened to be like really close to where we were at.
mm.
So her dad's like, what if we can do it in Hawaii? And the first place he calls up, they were like, we just had a cancellation. We can get you in right now at that exact date.
There you go, man.
And so, yeah, that's how it happened. It just was like, open doors. And so we were in Hawaii, and got to like get married there, which was like insane. It was so beautiful.
That's
And
so cool, man.
we were back for, yeah, just a little bit. And then we came back for a while after. And yeah, and then we came back to the States after that. And my wife's her sister, she was having kids and stuff, and she was like, I want to watch them like grow up. And so
Hmm.
we were praying about that for a little while, and
Hmm.
felt like there was some confirmation, like, oh, it's good timing for us to come back. And
Mm.
we
Yep.
always have a heart, there, and I think that's always been like um, our deeper desire is that we would see some open doors down the line to be able to
Mm.
go back there. But I think different circumstances, going
Yeah.
in there with little resources and seeing the needs there that were so big, and just feeling like you were a drop in the bucket. you
Hmm.
know I think that's my hope, is that when we come back, it will look different in ways that we can, hopefully see some change.
So you're definitely planning on returning to Uganda in the near future.
um I would say so, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about near, I don't know about far, I don't know when it is, but
In
I've
your
always,
lifetime. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Like,
Hmm.
we both feel pulled there. We just don't know when, and I think
Hmm.
that we're both in that place where we're like, waiting for it to be confirmed. And I think that,
You'll know. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I
You'll
think
know.
we'll know, and
Yeah.
and and I could see it too. Like, this doesn't mean it will happen that way, but I could see it being like us having kids, and having our parents around and getting to see them grow up a little bit, when they're
Hmm.
like super young.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I don't really know, but as soon as it's confirmed, that's the great thing about her too, is that she's so like, when God confirms something, it doesn't matter what it is. She's like,
Yeah.
so.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool, dude. I love it, man. Wow. Yeah, this is really remarkable stories you got, man. That's so cool. So anything cool in the near future that you guys are doing? Because I'm sure our viewers like love to listen to what you had to say. And any way that they can follow up with what you're doing? Are you doing anything particularly? I know you're saying you're working a little construction. You have an awesome music project that you do with your brother and sister right now. It sounds awesome. Shambrick Sound is like awesome music, man. So you doing anything else? Where can they find you? Where can they reach out to you and talk to you if you feel comfortable with randos reaching out to you?
I mean, yeah, yeah, I mean, like, I'm just a normal dude. I don't really know.
Just a
Like, I
normal
just,
dude, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I have
Well,
Instagram, I guess.
let's talk
Like,
about your music project because that's like super beautiful what you guys are doing. So, shambrooksounds.com or something. Is that what that is?
yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
We do like custom music, for events. We'll do them for like weddings and things like that,
Mhm.
where we get to kind of walk people through a process where we get to tell their story through music.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And it's just been a lot of fun. It's been really cool. So we'll do that for that. We'll do it for businesses.
Yeah.
We're doing one for a children's book right now, which will be really cool. We're all really excited for that.
Nice.
So, yeah, we've been able to kind of pour time into that. And then my wife and I have been working on, it's like a deep desire of ours to see things simplified in terms of people, kind of in the ways I was talking about, like, how do you hear from God? Like, how do you develop these spiritual senses in a way that it's normal, you know? And what does that look like? And so we've been talking about that for quite some time now, and just feel like even more recently, it's something that we've been working on to kind of walk people through that and make it just easily accessible for them.
Awesome.
Hopefully not bog them down with a bunch of information, but just give them kids.
Well, I mean, please tell me you're going to make a wedding song for your experience, because that would be like off the charts. You know, it's like, I exorcised this demon and I met my honey, you know, something about scales and weights.
That'd be an interesting one for sure.
That'd be really interesting. All right, man. On that note, I'm going to pause the video. Maybe we can stick on and talk after, but thank you so much, Dane. That was really awesome. I'm so glad we got that recorded, dude. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, man. Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed. I always enjoy talking to Dane. So thank you again, Dane. Awesome.
Hi.